Hello and welcome to another episode of We Have a Meeting podcast. So today we are very lucky to have such an incredible guest. Our guest today is somebody that quit the hustle and bustle of their 9 to 5 to follow their dreams. The founder of a Millennial Mind podcast, which has been ranked in the top 1.5 podcasts globally, an executive coach and an inspirational entrepreneur. This conversation is going to be filled with actionable takeaways around mindset, productivity, and why we should always ask the questions despite the consequences. So today we're joined by Shivani Pau. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Thank you for coming on. Big fan of what you do in the space. So Shivani, I guess we'll start the way we always start. Tell us who you are and what problem you solve.
Oh, that's a bit of a tricky question. I don't know what problem I solve, if I'm completely honest. Well, I'm a podcaster. I just, like you said, recently quit my job. I'm also the founder of a Millennial Mind. And recently I've been doing other things like running goal setting workshops and other things alongside coaching. And I guess the problem I'm trying to solve is I want to inspire people to be the best version of themselves. And I think a lot of the time we have blocks in our minds. We have limiting beliefs. We don't push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, and that's what I really want to encourage people to do, and also ask hard questions, which is hopefully what I get through my podcast. I always ask the difficult questions and the ones that nobody else wants to ask.
Beautiful. And the people that come to you for your workshops and the corporate side of things, what are they typically struggling with that you can come in and say, actually, you're doing this and this wrong, let me help you?
I think it's more a structure. So, in corporates, it's very much around leadership and culture. And a lot of corporates struggle with that at the moment, especially with managing employee engagement, increasing retention. So I talk a lot around that, around learning organizations, how to improve your culture, how to manage teams. That's on the corporate side. And then in other parts, I think it's really a structure to follow to really hit your goals. When I started my podcast, one of the things that came around was coaching. And every single person was like, I want to achieve this, but I don't know how to do it. And so I created a really simple structure. And after using it a few times, I thought, why don't I actually create a planner like this? And that's where my performance planner was created. So I think structure is really important and routine is really important for a lot of people. And if you give them something that's simple and easy to follow, you'll see that they are actually able to apply themselves a lot more effectively.
Couldn't agree more with that. I think simplicity is often the key to brilliant, especially with the people that we deal with as well. They often just aren't seeing things for how simple it could be, and then when you get things as simple as possible, it becomes much more effective. So on your podcast, you talk about confidence a lot, and I think confidence is one of those things that's often debated. Is it something that you're just born with? I was just always confident, I was the center of attention as a little kid, or is it something that can be cultivated and almost treated like a skill? Yeah. So from your understanding, where do you kind of sit on that argument?
I definitely think it's a skill. Now, if people who know me and from when I was from a young age, I've always been very much of a people person. I've always loved public speaking. It doesn't mean that even to this day, right now, whenever I have to speak on stage, even if I have to come on this podcast, I'm not nervous. It doesn't mean that I'm always really confident. It just means that I've done it so many times that I can now tell myself, okay, you've done it so many times, so you have nothing to be afraid of. But confidence is a skill. It's something you have to work on every single day. And what I always say is, the more often you do something, the more competent you'll become, and the more confident you'll become, the higher your competence level. So, one tip I always tell people if they're struggling to speak in front of a camera is, practice speaking in front of a camera and do not upload the video. Just speak on camera, pretend it's only you, and don't upload it. No one has to see it. No one knows you've done it. There's no expectation. There's no worry. It's just for you. And do that as many times as you like until you feel, okay, I think I'm ready now to share this message. Because what will happen is if I'm going to do a video with you, let's say on goal setting, and I'm going to practice it, I'm going to do it in front of the mirror 8 times. On the 9th time, I'll be like, I'm pretty good at this. Maybe I should do it. And then all those fears will come in around, oh, will people like it? Will people not? But at that point, you'll be so eloquent in the way that you're speaking that you'll be confident enough to release it. Then, of course, all the other fears and doubts will come in, but it's very important to take that initial step. And that's one of the things I always speak about is the first step is the hardest step, but it's the only way you're going to figure out what you want to do is if you just try. Absolutely no one was born confident out of the womb. Bill Gates wasn't born a billionaire when he was born. Do you know what I mean? You had to build these skills and you had to keep trying to get there. Now, the only way you're going to kind of limit yourself to that is if you look at other people and think, oh, but they're just so naturally good at it. They know exactly what they're doing. No one is, some people do have a natural skill at particular things, but they still have to build on that to be great. And so I really believe that, it is really a skill that anyone can have.
So that was interesting. One thing that you kind of hinted at there was it's often just building the muscle memory up of just getting comfortable doing something.
Yeah.
So would that apply for public speaking as well? Like how would you apply that kind of... So you're not sat in front of a camera, but you're all going to be sat in front of an audience. So let's take that as an example. So what would you do then to prepare yourself in that muscle memory example?
Well, in that situation, you could actually get a group of your friends together and say, I'm going to practice in front of you. And that way you're building it up in front of 10 people. And then you could do it in front of 20, and you can do it in front of 30. You could even honestly put a screen up on YouTube and have an audience in front of you and pretend you're speaking in front of them. I'm so sorry. And sorry about that. That was my alarm to upload my TikTok. This is how rigid I have to be in life. We'll talk about that. So, you can just get an audience up on YouTube and put that there and then speak in front of them. But there are different ways in order to do that, right? So it's all about building. I would start with a friend group, and then I would start with going on to, asking more people. Asking to speak at free events would be a really good place to do that as well. So you're building up that audience for that time that you need to speak for whenever it is.
Amazing. I think, yeah, it's one of those things that the more you put in, it's going to always be the more that you get out. And we say that when we're teaching people sales or cold calling, like you've just got to practice, and you've got to get those 10,000 hours in before you grow and you become an expert. So a lot of our listeners are working in sales and they're budding entrepreneurs. And I listened to your podcast and I loved it. The one about quitting your 9 to 5. So yeah. Why do you think it's important to take risks, and what actionable takeaways can you give to people to put them in the right position to do this?
Well, let me just say one thing. I was never a risk taker. I was being a very regimented person who, was like, I can never take any risks. I don't know what I'm doing. And, one of the things that I'll just tell you the story because it's very relevant into why I eventually decided to take that risk. And I would say to everyone else is, you can't just take risks and not have a plan. Right? So I never ever thought that this would be my full-time job. If you told me this 3 years ago, I would laugh in your face. But essentially what happened was I was inspired by my auntie when she came to the UK on a book tour, and she was doing all of these, amazing speeches, and she was so inspirational to me that summer I actually coincidentally went to New York, and she lived there. And I said, can I shadow you for a day? And as I was shadowing her, she was doing a podcast. Now at this time I was only listening to Tom Bilyeu, Jay Shetty, all of these really great people, and I was thinking, how on earth am I going to get to do that? But she was doing it in her office, just audio, with headphones. And I thought, oh, well, this is a bit manageable, so I could do that. And she said, yeah, you should. So I wrote down my ideas, and I came back to the UK, and I thought, I'm going to do a podcast. At this time, I just actually had to focus on getting a job first, because I just took 3 months out for traveling. So then I came back to the UK, I had to find a job. And as I was in my job, this podcast idea kept being in my mind. Like, I want to do a podcast. And so I did it. I did it alongside my work. Then lockdown hit, which was great. So I actually released it 6 months later after I recorded the first episode, because just like everyone else, when you think of an idea, and I said previously, all those negative thoughts come into your head, right? And you think, what am I doing? So I released this podcast, and as I was doing it, it was growing. It was number 10 in the charts on the first day I released it. But I only had 2 episodes. So what I was doing per season was researching the guests, recording the episode, editing it, and releasing it, all in the space of 1 week, right? And so when I hit 10 episodes, I was knackered. I was like, all right, season 1 done, yeah? At that point, I took another 6 months or however long break until I did season 2. Then I took another break before I released season 3. Now, last year is when I said to myself, okay, people are really liking my podcast, but I'm not consistent. And I believe that I'm actually really good at doing them, and I'm bringing on really good guests, and I want to speak about so many more topics. So let me dedicate myself to uploading 1 video a week. I'm going to invest in a studio when I have made 0 money out of this podcast. I'm going to invest in a studio. I'm just going to give it 1 shot. I'm going to do 1 season and see how it goes. Through that, I started getting really good guests, and we'll talk about Steven Bartlett in a minute. But I started getting all these amazing opportunities. Now, through that, I started thinking, okay, and a few people were asking me to do more ads on Instagram because I was getting paid through that. So, I had the performance planner as a business. I had the ads through Instagram. I still had a very low following at this point. It was around 7,000, But I started to see the potential. And what I started to do was research people who are making money from podcasts, figure out how much money you can make on social media, figure out what my other avenues could be. Could I do workshops? Could I do coaching? What else can I do to kind of raise that income? How am I going to get sponsorship? All of those things I was figuring out. And it was in July that my video went viral. It got 5.7 million views on Instagram. So for TikTok, it's not that high, but for Instagram, it was significantly higher. My profile grew from about 18,000 to 56,000 in a week. It was wow. Really big. And so I was like, okay, now I am exhausted at this point because I'm uploading one video a week. I'm working a full-time job. I used every single holiday day I had to record a podcast. And I only had 5 holidays left and we were in July. So I was thinking, what on earth am I going to do? At this point, I figured out exactly my different income streams, how much money I could possibly make. And I just decided, I'm living at home at the moment. So that's a privilege that I have. Am I going to use that privilege right or am I not? And I decided in that moment, I think I should take the risk. I want to do this. I want to be number one. And I'm never, ever going to be a partner at Atos where I was working. I don't ever want to be number one in management consulting. So what do I want to do? And I had to figure it out. Okay, I saved for a very long time. So I have a year's runway, more than that, but I'll give myself 1 year. My costs will be low. I'm not going to go out. I'm going to work so hard to make sure that I make this, monetize on this. And that's when I eventually took the risk, was when, it was impossible for me to keep doing what I was doing. There was a big opportunity if I just dedicated more time and more resource to it. And also I saw the potential within myself to make sure I would work hard at something and I wasn't going to give up.
And you had those tangible results that you knew that, well, if I only dedicate this amount of time, I get X. Well, I know that if I kind of dedicate more, then I know more is going to come from it. I'd be really interested, Shivani, if you're okay with being so honest. You spoke then a little bit about like some of the doubts and the thoughts that creeped in. What did you do to like bypass them and say, you know what, I am committed, this is something that I'm going to run with?
Well, the doubts and fears were always around money, right? Because everything else was fine. I was getting great guests. I knew what I wanted to do. I was really passionate about this. But the doubts and fears were around money. How am I going to monetize on this? How am I going to get a sponsor? I'm paying so much for the studio. I'm paying for an editor. How am I going to manage it? And, with editors, it's really tricky because, I think you get what you pay for, and I couldn't really pay for much. So I was getting not very good editors editing my stuff. I was having to do it myself. So at that point, I just said, right, I'm going to edit myself. Now, I was working 9 to about 6 with an hour gap in between for my lunch break, right? I'd have to go into the office some days and that would wipe out the whole day. But generally, I had between 5 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. every single morning to work on my podcast. I then had from 6 p.m. to about 10:30 p.m. to work on my podcast. Now, bearing in mind, doing those days, I was absolutely knackered. I was also having to go to PR events. I was also going on other people's podcasts. I was also trying to manage 3 different social media accounts. TikTok for me, Performance Planner on Instagram for me, Instagram for me for my account, and then YouTube Shorts, and LinkedIn. So actually it's more than 3 accounts. It's like so many accounts. I'm trying to do all of this stuff whilst manage the podcast, while edit it, whilst manage all those clips. And I just remember thinking, like, how much more time would I have if I had the whole day to work on this? So why don't I try? Because if I had the whole day, I'll have so much more time. Now, I'll tell you now, that was a complete lie. I don't know where the hell all my time goes now. I time block everything, but there seems to still not be enough time in the day. But, it really, really has helped me to grow by quitting my job, because I now have those 8 hours I was working in the day for my corporate role to work on my own business. And that in itself has, just been tremendous in my growth.
So this isn't in the list of questions, but we're just kind of hinting on it. I think people would be interested to know. So your day now, in terms of getting the most out of it, and there's things that have happened on this podcast where you're sort of hinting at how regimented you've got to be.
Yeah.
So what does a typical day look like from when you get up to when you put your head on your pillow at night?
Yeah, okay. So I'll talk about it in 2 elements. There's the days that I have a podcast and the days that I don't. Now, the days I have a podcast, usually I wake up quite early, like 5:30. And I wake up, and I used to go to the gym before, and I've stopped doing that now, which is terrible, but I just go straight onto my desk and I essentially fill out my day. So I have my performance planner, which I've designed, and it allows you to time block your day and fill out all the tasks that you need to do. Also tells you my 3 priorities and my 3 quick wins. And I fill out a page for my gratitude, my affirmations, my habit tracker, and I fill all of that out in the morning. Now I just get on with my task, whatever that may be. It might be, to edit some short clips. It might be to sort out the orders for my performance planner. It might be to email around sponsorships. It might be to email my podcast guests around when, if they're coming or not, then to chase them. Then also, I do YouTube thumbnails, Instagram thumbnails, Instagram editing, organizing a workshop. My days at the moment are absolutely mental because I'm doing so many different things. I'm doing, for example, I do have an editor for my podcast, but I have to review every single part of the podcast because even though I have an editor, only I know what's going to land on Instagram and what's going to land on TikTok and what's going to land on YouTube Shorts. So he'll send me a link and I will edit every single second of that podcast and say, this is for YouTube Shorts, this is for Instagram, this is for TikTok. So I have to go through that entire podcast and do that. So that's once a week. Then from that, I have to upload it onto all the different platforms and schedule it. The other thing is the planner. So with the planner, I essentially write a handwritten note for every single order and package that out myself still at the moment. So that's in terms of the planner. The other things I'm doing is the workshops. So at the moment, I'm organizing workshops for goal setting in terms of having to do the website, the fulfillment, the captions, then uploading that again onto all platforms. That's one element. I actually have when is this podcast going to be released?
Usually within 2 weeks.
Okay, so yeah. Will it be released before the 4th of February?
We can make it so it is.
Can you make it after?
I can make it after as well.
So I've got a TED Talk on the 4th of February. So at the moment, I'm trying to memorize as much as I can my TED Talk, which I haven't done. And it's literally 10 days from now and 9 days from now. So I'm in panic stations for everything at the moment. I also am going to Mumbai in March, and I'm also going to be doing a podcast season there. So organizing the guests, organizing the equipment, organizing the hotel, all of that stuff. So at the moment, you caught me on a day where I'm like, oh my God, everything is crazy. I'm also trying to get sponsorships for my podcast. And then on top of that, managing the ads and the gifting and the posting that I do for the Instagram. So at the moment, I would say, my days are crazy. And add that into going to the studio and recording. It takes me an hour and a half to get to my studio, 2 hours I'm at the studio, and an hour and a half to get back. So on the days where I have a podcast, it takes out 6 hours of my day.
Wow. Have you found things that need to happen to keep you sane, or do you just roll the punches and see what happens?
You know what? I think I need to get back into the gym. I do try and go for a walk every day and listen to a podcast and try and detox, but sometimes that doesn't really happen. So, going for a walk is actually really imperative for me, and I know that helps me feel sane. And I also take supplements as well, because without them, I think I would go mad.
So can we? One thing that you were talking about then was the workshops, which we were interested in talking to you about. So those workshops, who are they for, and what do people typically get out of them?
So I'll tell you how the workshop started. So again, from my podcast, from just uploading, and this is really imperative for anyone who wants to start a business. Bear in mind, when I started the podcast, I didn't expect to make any money. And, I've only had one sponsor for a bit, and I still don't really make any money from just the podcast. However, there's so many opportunities that have come about because of the value that I'm providing. Right? And I think that's what people miss. I'm only going to start a business if there's significant growth for me to make loads of money in the first 3 months. Well, no, that shouldn't be the objective. It should be, what value are you providing? Now, because of these podcasts, I started to get messages from corporate companies saying, hi, Shivani, would you be interested in talking to us around goal setting? Because I mentioned it once in my podcast. Or would you be interested in us talking about culture? Because you mentioned it in your podcast. Now, these weren't small companies. They were TSB, it was McKinsey & Co. They were big companies that were reaching out. And through that, I started running these workshops. Now, goal setting is something I'm really passionate about because I've created the planner, and it's something that I speak about because I think it's so easy to put into effect if you want to hit any goal. And once I was doing these workshops, I started thinking, well, if corporates are calling me to do them, why don't I just run my own? Now, again, running an event, I've never done one before, so it was chaos trying to figure out how to do that, but I did it. And this is the point, I'm stumbling, I'm learning. And I made it very clear to everyone, this is the first one I'm doing. There's going to be mistakes that I do. And, hopefully, generally the feedback was very good. And hopefully, I can do more and more of these and grow them. But that's really how they came about. So when people are struggling to hit their goals, when people are struggling to figure out what they want to do, if people are struggling to kind of find this balance in their day, the performance planner is really effective because not only does it focus on your performance at work, it focuses on the performance within your mind. There is no journal out there or planner out there that has all of the tasks that you need to do, setting your goals, prioritizing them, and also has your mindfulness as well, all on one page. You have a separate journal, you have a separate gratitude journal, you have a separate whatever. So many different things out there, but not everything is in one, and that's what I wanted to create, and that's what I'm bringing to my audience.
So I know this is something that you is part of your business model, so I don't need to give anything away for free. But
Yeah.
around goal setting, can you maybe share typically where people go wrong and how they can maybe look at that differently as a bit of an actionable takeaway?
Absolutely. I mean, I've got all of the information on my YouTube as well in terms of how to set your goals effectively. I think it's really around a structure. So, you have a really big picture goal. I want to make £1 million this year. Okay, great. How are you going to do that? I don't know. So how are you going to break it down? Okay, well, every month I need to be making X amount. Okay, well, how can I make that every single month? Okay, well, these are my income streams. This is what I'm earning now. So this is what I'm earning now. This is the current state. This is the future state. How can I grow? There's that gap. Okay, there we go. We've got a plan now for how you're going to achieve £1 million a year. So I always say to people, create a big goal, break the steps down in order to do it, and then tell me exactly which week of every month you're going to do it. Because you could say in January, I'm going to make 10 million. Okay, great. So that's 2.5 every week. So how are you going to achieve that in week 1? And it's really as simple as that, as breaking it down.
Yeah, I think so many people that they don't know how to. Steven Bartlett said something on a podcast, and it was about obviously you've got to set the sat nav, you've got to know where you're going, because if you don't, then you're just kind of stumbling. And it's okay, like you alluded to it earlier. Everybody's learning. Entrepreneurs are all learning on the job. But as long as you know your path and you know that there's a set reason for it. So you've alluded to it, and obviously this is how I found you and your podcast.
Yeah.
We're salespeople, so we face rejection through and through on a daily basis, like it's like a big slap in the face. I wanted to talk to you about the situation with the podcast and Steven Bartlett and the story there, and the questions that you asked and why you asked them and the outcome. I'll pass the mic to you, Shivani, because I'm sure you've said it a few times now.
Yeah, no, everyone always asks me about this story, but I don't think I've actually shared why I believe he said yes very articulately before, maybe. So essentially, Reshma, the lady I spoke about, who's my auntie, and I just want to make one thing clear. When I say she's my auntie, I've met her twice in my whole life, right? So before I'd met her at this time, I'd met her when I was 6, and then I met her in London, and then I met her in New York. Okay, I met her in LA. So I met her 4 times in my entire life, but before Steven Bartlett, I'd met her twice. So I really hadn't met her. She's not like my auntie that, I speak to her every day. I don't call her Reshma auntie. I just call her by her name. And she's my mum's cousin. And she messaged me one day and she said, do you know who Steven Bartlett is? And I said, yeah. Have you been asked to go on his podcast? And she said, yes, I have. And I said, you have to go. And, it just so happened, it was really bizarre, that the dates I was going to LA, I've never been to LA apart from when I was a kid, but I wanted to go to LA and film a season out there as well. I'd never been to LA, and just so happened that the dates that she was asked to go, I was in LA and Steven Bartlett was in LA. And it was mad. So, she took me to him. And, a few days before, I remember I didn't really tell many people that I was going to LA. Sorry, let me start that again. I didn't tell very many people that, I was going to be meeting Steven Bartlett, right? I didn't want to jinx it. But I remember, my mum saying to me, yeah, but what are you actually going to ask him? And I was like, I don't know. I'll ask him to come on my podcast. And she was like, okay. And I was like, let me think about this. So this was the bit that was difficult and the mistake I made, actually. I didn't prepare enough because I was very scared that he was going to say no. And I remember thinking, I don't want to prepare enough because if he says no, then it's going to really be a kick in the teeth. And so I bought his book. And 2 days before, the day before, I started reading it. And I just was skimming through it thinking, what the hell could I ask him? Because I didn't want to ask him the typical questions of tell me how you started, Everyone knows his story. Anyway, I prepared the questions the day before. And I went to the podcast. Now, as I went to the podcast, I remember thinking, okay, if he says no, you've still got to meet the #1 person in your industry. And you've seen him in person. And that is big enough in itself. So just don't worry about it. Just go and you'll be fine. And I met him and instantly we got along. We just really got along. He was very nice. And I had his book and I had a performance planner in my hand. So when I met him, I didn't say anything. I just had those 2 things in my hand and he said, oh, you've got the book. Let me sign it for you. As we were speaking, he was asking me what I do. I was telling him about my own podcast. I said nothing. I didn't say I want you to come on my podcast. I didn't say anything. I was just telling him about it. I was telling him about my vision. I was telling him about my purpose. I was telling him how scared I was to quit my job. Then Reshma was like, I think she should quit her job. Don't you think she would be really good at it? And he was like, yeah, you should. You should. Do you come from an immigrant background? Because that's exactly what my mom told me to. So immediately we had relatability. Because he was like, my mom told me not to quit my job. Your parents telling you not to quit your job. Again, I said nothing. In the book, he wrote, dear Shivani, your potential is unlimited or something like that, or your potential is mental or something. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my God, did you just write that? It's crazy. Anyway, I also said, I've got a performance planner for you. I designed this to help people hit their goals. And he was like, wow, you designed this. Now, he hadn't released the diary yet, but he said, I'm planning on doing my own thing. I would love to get your feedback. So again, there was a mutual connection because he had his own podcast. He was releasing a diary. I have my own podcast. I've released a planner and I've given it to him. Again, I said nothing. I sat back and I watched that podcast. Bearing in mind, it was 40 degrees heat. The aircon wasn't on for an hour and 40 minutes. And I didn't say anything. After he finished the podcast, he said, did you like that? And I said, yeah, it was great. I went to the toilet and I was so nervous. I was like, I have to ask him, otherwise I'm going to regret this. And I went up to him and I said, Steven, and he said, yes, I'll invest in your business. Yes, I'll be on your podcast. Yes, whatever you want, I'll do it. Like as a joke. And I said, look, I've got my camera. Can I please just get 5 minutes of your time? And I said to him, actually, I'll kick myself if I never ask you this question. Can I please just get 5 minutes of your time? And he said, yeah, sure. So I said, okay, I've got my camera. I brought out like my really shitty vlogging camera. And I went and I said to him, okay, can we do it? And he looked at me and I knew this would happen because you have to remember also, if you're somebody who believes in great quality, you're not going to want to be on a rubbish little camera. The mics were like this. They weren't like this. So how are we going to get the camera to show both of the mics at opposite ends of the table? You've seen the setup, right? So I was like, we could move the mics in the middle. Maybe that would work. And he was like, do you just want to use my setup? And I was like, yes. So then we sat down and we recorded, and I think there's a few things there. First of all, I had his book, so I showed that I was genuinely interested in him. I gave him my planner, so I gave him something without me asking for anything. And I waited for the right moment to speak to him after he had finished the podcast, after he was happy about his podcast with my auntie, and when he was feeling, oh, that's good, to say, can I just have 5 minutes of your time? And I will regret it if I never ask you. Being humble like that and saying, look, I will regret it if I never ask you is really, really important. And I also made it very easy for him. He didn't have to leave anywhere. He literally didn't have to change. The setup was there, ready for him to do it. So why would he say no? If I'd asked him to come to London and say, when you're in London, can you come to my studio and record a podcast with me? He would have said no. It would be impossible for him. So it's about making things easy. And it's about doing it in a place of and from being humble. Now, a lot of people now ask me, can I come on your podcast? If I'd asked Steven Bartlett in that moment, can I come on your podcast? He would have said no. But I asked him to come on mine. And I think that's really important is, I will happily go on anyone's podcast. I'm going on 5 podcasts this month. But it's really difficult to ask to come on my podcast because there's so much involved in releasing an episode. There's so much money, there's so much time, there's so much effort, there's so much research. And not every guest will align with what your vision is. And it's really important to remember that. So yeah, there's a Steven Bartlett story.
I think that was amazing. And we're big fans of it. If you don't ask the question, then you're never going to know the answer. Shivani, I could speak with you all day. Thank you so much. I think it's a lot of actionable takeaways, very inspirational. If we could do a quick fire, I guess. Sure. You have some amazing guests on your podcast. What's the one line or one piece of advice that you've heard that you've carried through and you think is the one that everybody should be kind of listening to?
Trust yourself. It's the biggest regret I have is not trusting myself. And that's what every person has said to me on this podcast. I believed in myself. I knew that I could do it. And I didn't listen to the outside noise. And I regret not doing that sooner.
Oh, amazing. Inspirational. Shivani, if people want to check you out or listen to what you do, where should they find you?
It's Shivani Pau on Instagram, it's Shivani Pau on YouTube, it's Shivani Pau on TikTok, but you can also search A Millennial Mind with 2 L's and 2 N's, everyone always forgets that, on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. But yeah, you can just search my name and you'll be able to find it.
Incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Amazing.